nominee.org. Nan Aron is the president of Alliance for Justice, and you're calling the nomination of Judge Neil Gorsuch a disastrous choice. Why?
Good morning. Why is he disastrous? He is disastrous because, if confirmed, he would take our country backward. Based on his record, which we have reviewed, he is adamantly opposed to the ability of government to regulate, to protect the quality of our air, the water we drink, workers' rights, the medicines we take, the food we eat. He has a view of government's role that would basically limit government from protecting our health, our welfare, workers' rights, civil rights. That is really the signature part of his jurisprudence, and one that gives us great concern. In addition, he is opposed to women's reproductive rights. He's opposed to rules and laws that have enabled women to move up in the workplace, to have protections in that workplace, along with people of color. He has criticized the courts for advancing LGBTQ rights. So this is a man who's been chosen by the president to carry out the president's own particular agenda. And at this moment in history, Steve, particularly with an administration that is devoted to dismantling the social, economic, political progress of the last 100 years, we think that we need a Supreme Court that will provide an independent check on the actions of the executive branch. And our worry is that he won't provide that check.
Was there anyone on that list of 21 names that Donald Trump released last year that would be acceptable to you?
After researching every single one of those names, we came to the conclusion that no, there was no one that was suitable to serve and be confirmed as the next Supreme Court justice.
Let me share with you this morning in the New York Times. It's called An Opinionated Student, and these are the words of Neil Gorsuch when he was a student columnist at Columbia University. And among the things he talked about was political, ethnic, and religious diversity, criticizing Columbia University for not being diverse enough. Would you agree with him on that point?
I would, although I'd want to know more about how he determined diversity. Perhaps in the years that he was at Columbia, he believed that there weren't a sufficient number of students that supported the war in Vietnam. I just don't know, so
let me just read to you exactly what he wrote. Truth is, Columbia does have a moral responsibility. It has a moral responsibility to overcome the tyrannical atmosphere of ideas that has so dominated life on Morningside, which is where the campus is located, for the last 20 years. It has a responsibility to make the political, philosophical, and ethical experience here as diverse and varied as the cultural and ethnic experience.
It sounds great. I'd want to know what he was actually referring to, whether I know Columbia, I know Morningside Heights, I know that area, and I know what Columbia was like in the years in which he's talking about it. And perhaps he thought there needed to be more students who, of a conservative, in the conservative, I just don't know. I'd have to know more.
The Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell last week praising this election, as you might imagine. Here's what he said. We'll get your reaction.
The left-leaning Denver Post recently highlighted Judge Gorsuch's reputation as, quote, a brilliant legal mind, end quote, who applies the law fairly and consistently. And I'm happy to report we've even been assured by liberal talk show host Rachel Maddow that Gorsuch is a relatively mainstream choice. Rachel Maddow. Turns out, in the years since Judge Gorsuch's unopposed Senate confirmation, he's shown himself to be the very kind of judge everyone hoped he'd be one who demonstrates a sense of fairness and impartiality that Democrat then Senator Salazar lauded him for in 2006, which Salazar called a keystone for being a judge. That was a Democratic senator from Colorado when he was confirmed in 2006. That was Judge Neil Gorsuch's reputation back then, and it is his richly deserved reputation still, as those in both parties who've known and worked with him continue to tell us.
Nan Aron of Alliance for Justice, the comments of the Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell, the story this morning in the New York Times for a court pick, a painful lesson as Neil Gorsuch travels on Capitol Hill. Your reaction to what Senator McConnell said?
No one would dispute the fact that Neil Gorsuch is very smart in terms of his intellect, in terms of his education. No one raises any questions about that. But for a Supreme Court justice, that is not the end of the inquiry. One needs to look at, and we are calling on the Senate to look at his entire record, because a judge not only needs to have an excellent record in the law, needs to be an individual of impeccable honesty, but someone who has a judicial temperament, someone who's fair-minded, open-minded, someone who's willing to listen to both sides of an argument and come to a conclusion that is reasonable and based on the law. Someone who doesn't have an ideology that is backward-looking, and when I say that, I'm referring to someone who doesn't have a hostility to the progress we've made in society, but someone who's willing to go forward. People in this country don't want to move backward. Yes, there are groups of people who might, but in general, most people are happy, are pleased with the forward motion of this country and want to move forward. And actually, with life complicated as it is, complex problems arising every day, we want justices who can look ahead, not look backward. Our problem with Judge Gorsuch is that he has a very fixed view of the law, a very rigid view of the law, and will not be open and fair-minded to claims of discrimination, unfairness, etc.
Our guest is Nan Aron. She is the president of Alliance for Justice, a veteran of the ACLU, and a graduate of Oberlin College, earned her law degree from Case Western University in Pittsburgh. Billy is joining us, Spokane, Washington, Republican line. Good Sunday morning. Thank you for being with us.
Yes, sir. I'm a veteran. I just want to say that, and I've been trying to get on quite a bit of time. I appreciate the opportunity. The one thing that I support about the judge that she's illy speaking of is I don't want a penny of my tax money to pay for the death or termination of an unborn child or fetus. If you want to go out and sin through fornication or adultery, whatever you want to do, don't make me part of the termination or murder of a fetus or a child. You get all these people who want to do that and get them to donate their money and get them to do that. The judge has been done an honorable service in everything he's done, and I'm very thankful, as Ms. Nan just said, that he does have a fixed position on the law. It's the law that supports the Constitution. So, like I said, President Trump was my president, so was President Obama. Wasn't my choice, President Obama, but I supported him for 8 years. And I just think that if any other religion in this country did this radicalized and had radicalization within it, I know for a fact that that would be met with the same complications that we're doing.
Nan Aron.
Well, sir, I certainly respect your point of view. My disagreement with you is that I think people from all walks of life throughout this country should be able to walk into a courtroom anywhere and have a fair chance at seeking some redress for problems. I think we all want judges and justices who have an open mind, who will be fair, honest, apply the law. I don't think we want judges whose minds are completely made up on issues. I don't think that benefits our cases, nor does it benefit the country.
Nan, Aron, this morning in her column, Ruth Marcus in the Washington Post has this piece on the swing vote on the high court. Justice Kennedy, please don't retire. And I ask you about him because if Neil Gorsuch's nomination does go through the Senate, if he is in the seat of the late Justice Antonin Scalia, but if Justice Kennedy retires, or Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, or Justice Stephen Breyer, what kind of fight will we see in this town?
Well, first of all, I'm glad you raised that because it could well be that we have several new justices or several openings on the Supreme Court. After all, we have 3 justices now in their 80s, and it might be that at some point one or more seek to retire. I don't think that has anything, though, to do with this particular seat. And we need to take each seat on its own, and we have to evaluate each seat independently of the others. It certainly could be that Justice Kennedy wants to leave the court within the next few years. None of us knows the answer to that. And I think we have to focus on this particular seat and Neil Gorsuch's qualifications for this seat.
If there is a vacancy in 2020, an election year, and if the Republicans maintain their majority in the Senate, do you think Senator McConnell would abide by the rule he put in place in 2016 by not putting up a nomination during an election year?
Of course not. Of course not. I think Mitch McConnell, who's been very clear about his motives and intentions, he deliberately left the seat open. This was Scalia's seat that became vacant a year ago, actually, this month. Became vacant when Justice Scalia died. And he was very clear he wasn't going to give Merrick Garland, nominated by President Obama, either a hearing or a vote. And he made clear his intention by saying, look, we're going to await the next president, and with the hope that the next president would be Republican. I cannot imagine in a million years if a seat becomes vacant in 2020 and with Donald Trump still as president, that he would do anything but rush that nomination through just as fast as he possibly could do that.
Let's go to Tiffany in Folkestone, Georgia. We're talking with Nan Aron of Alliance for Justice. Thanks for joining in on the conversation. Democrats line.
Okay, I really don't think that's true because, as he's saying, he sees the guidelines that's already in place. So therefore, he's going to keep everything going like it's supposed to be. And what's in place, who are we to change them? You know, there's no in between. Everybody is equal. Forget the religion, forget whatever anybody else is doing. All of us bleed the same. So therefore, who are we to just try to judge anything? And when you do wrong, wrong is wrong and right is right. We make our own decisions. So therefore, for every action, there's a reaction.
Tiffany from Georgia.
Tiffany, I agree with you. I would just say that a Supreme Court appointment is one of the most critical jobs in America. After all, presidents get elected 4 years, maybe 8 years. Supreme Court justices are served for life. Once you go on, and Neil Gorsuch is a very young man, 49 years old. Once he's, if he were to be confirmed, could be on the court 30, maybe 40 years. And therefore, it's a difficult decision. It's a weighty decision for senators. After all, they're confirming someone who will hold an enormous power in our democracy. And because of that, have to make a decision, have to weigh different factors, but we hope in this case, given Judge Gorsuch's record, they will vote not to confirm him.
From Englewood, Tennessee, Independent Line, Maryland, good morning. Marilyn, we'll try one more time. We'll go on to Denise in Angola, Indiana. Good morning. Dennis, I'm sorry. Good morning, Dennis.
Yes, good morning to you. What this woman, your guest, won't tell you is that she is an extreme progressive, and all she wants to do is have judges on this court that will rewrite the Constitution, not abide by it.
Dennis, I'm not quite sure I agree with you. I'm glad, though, that you raised the Constitution, because I think at the end of the day, we want our judges and justices to abide by core constitutional values. The Constitution is our lodestar in this country, and we all want justices to interpret and read that Constitution just as fairly as they possibly can. So thank you for raising the notion of the Constitution. It's what drives this democracy.
From Santa Barbara, California, Philip, you're next, Democrats line.
Hey, good morning. I was just going to say that I had some I was originally started to be pretty enthusiastic about the Gorsuch nomination because he seemed to be, his legal jurisprudence seemed to be in good faith, which is pretty important because we want our Supreme Court to have actual people on it and be full size. As part of the Constitution, that seems a greater constitutional priority. But I had, after reading about him, I had some hesitancy about its strongly held political opinions. And since he was supposed to be nominated in the same kind of grain as Scalia, I was kind of uncomfortable with the idea that Scalia kind of changed his whole states' rights attitude with, say, assisted suicide in Oregon or Bush v. Gore.
Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think, I compliment you on reading beyond just what some of Neil Gorsuch's friends and former co-workers say about him, because after all, the record is what is most important in deciding whether an individual is the right person for the job. On some instances, particularly in the area of agency regulations, Neil Gorsuch would go farther than Antonin Scalia did in limiting the power and the ability of agencies, particularly those agencies that protect every aspect, really, of our life here in America, to get us through the day, to regulate in our best interest, to be there when we question whether our food is safe, our medicines are the right ones, whether our water is of a quality to be drinking. Those agency officials with experience, going back decades, are really the ones who we vest with the decision-making power to come up with rules to protect Americans. And it is in that one area that Neil Gorsuch is even more rigid, more extremist than Antonin Scalia was.
We're talking with Nan Aron of Alliance for Justice, and Daniel Fisher has a piece available online at Forbes.com. His column, Liberals Paint Gorsuch as Dangerous, Radical, Extremist. His comment, really? Question mark. And Neil Katyal, who served as the acting Solicitor General in the Obama administration, wrote the following, if you had a chance to see it in the New York Times. He said, quote, "I have no doubt that if confirmed, Judge Gorsuch would help to restore confidence in the rule of law. His years on the bench reveal a commitment to judicial independence, a record that should give the American people confidence that he will not compromise principle to favor the president who appointed him. Judge Gorsuch's record suggests that he would follow in the tradition of Justice Elena Kagan, who voted against President Obama when she felt a part of the Affordable Care Act went too far."
I was very disappointed to see Neil Katyal's article, op-ed in the New York Times, but I'm not surprised. The legal fraternity in this country, people who know Neil Gorsuch are friends, hear his arguments, go to the same conferences. It's not surprising that they would be supportive of his confirmation. But not even Neil Katyal can provide information or a real substantive notion as to why Neil Gorsuch would be the kind of justice that we want and need in this country. You know, he's been appointed by a president who just yesterday went out on a limb criticizing a federal judge in Seattle, and I should mention a Republican-appointed federal judge who happened to rule against President Trump's travel ban. During the campaign, President Trump went after a very reputable, prestigious federal judge, Curiel, referring to him as a Mexican. Judge Curiel grew up in Indiana, saying he was not the appropriate judge to hear a case against Donald Trump. And so that would lead you to assume that perhaps Donald Trump is going to appoint judges, and maybe he used this consideration in nominating Neil Gorsuch. He's going to appoint judges who will do what he wants, who will carry out not just his political agenda, but uphold his personal agenda as well. And I think that makes this nomination one that is even more urgent, compelling for the Senate to take a deep breath and make sure that they carry out their constitutional task of advice and consent in as responsible a manner as possible.
If you want to read Neil Katyal's essay, it's available online at nytimes.com, and it has this headline, Why Liberals Should Back Neil Gorsuch. And by the way, C-SPAN will be your source for the confirmation hearings scheduled to get underway later in the spring. We're told that the hope is that a vote would happen around Easter, before or after. And of course, we'll have it live here on the C-SPAN network, cspan.org. Be sure to check out our free radio app. Let's go to John in New Jersey, Independent Line with Nan Aron of Alliance for Justice. Thank you for waiting. Good morning, John.
Good morning. Thank you for C-SPAN. Sometimes taking a step back, going back to the basics that we are human beings, is not necessarily going backwards. And regarding abortion, it was never meant to be on demand with no restrictions. And we cannot just continue to snuff out human life with impunity and assume that this is okay. We are human beings. We're meant to live in harmony with each other and in peace. Thank you.
I would agree. We are meant to live in harmony and peace. You and I have different views on abortion and reproductive rights and access to abortion by women throughout this country. And I think we just need to leave it there. My only hope is we have a decision going back to the 1970s, very clearly decided by a Supreme Court, Roe versus Wade. And we know from years and years of debates on both sides that most women in this country and most men want to accept that decision, should accept that decision, and move forward, and not relitigate a decision of 30 years ago and more. But let's establish it's the law of the land. And my goodness, there's so many problems we as a country face in all areas of life. And let's get judges and justices who will be looking forward, trying to resolve those problems, redress, give some relief to people with real issues in this country, people who can't get jobs because the color of their skin, or get promoted, or because of their gender. Let's really, as a country, try to figure out the kinds of people we want on these courts.
But you understand
so that we can.
Right, but you understand those who are pro-life view that issue as fundamental.
I do. I do, and I accept that that's their view. I don't accept the view that a small minority in this country on the issue of abortion will continue to try to tie the hands and limit the rights of women throughout this land for upcoming years. And I don't believe that abortion should be the only issue that we debate around the confirmation of Neil Gorsuch. There are too many other issues that should be part and parcel of that national discussion.
A few more minutes with our guest, Nan Aron. Let's go to Rob in Dutchess County, New York, Democrats line. Thank you for waiting. Good morning, Rob.
Good morning. Thank you for C-SPAN. Speaking of other issues, Citizens United, perhaps in my mind, is the most important in terms of this new justice, this possible new justice. Citizens United, one of President Trump's main promises was to drain the swamp. And draining the swamp has to mean nothing else but getting big money out of politics, getting lobbyists out of politics.
I think it's a very good point. I would say that there is nothing in Neil Gorsuch's record to suggest that he would take a view in opposition to Citizens United. We've seen nothing that suggests that he believes that money should be taken out of politics or that Citizens United was wrongly decided. In fact, he's subscribed to a point of view articulated in Citizens United that corporations are people, and therefore if a corporation takes a view like Hobby Lobby that, and this is taking it one step further, takes a view that women shouldn't have access to contraceptive materials for religious reasons, that's okay because corporations can make those kinds of decisions. But I'm really glad you raised that point, and it will certainly be an area that is raised at the confirmation hearing.
And that confirmation hearing taking place before the Senate Judiciary Committee. Raphael from Lake Placid, Florida, Republican line. You're next.
Yes, hello. Good morning. I'm just, I hear this, and isn't there consequences for elections? I mean, most Republicans went to the ballot box knowing that the Supreme Court justice was on the line, and that's what most of us voted for. And did not Obama made a remark during the State of the Union and belittled the Supreme Court pigs, and now everybody's so upset that he tweeted? It's like, there's history books, and there's a lot of things that Trump's doing that Obama did, but they seem to forget. Now they're all upset about the refugees, and I'm Cuban, and now any Cuban that gets to America is going to be sent back. And when they're sent back, they're going to prison.
We'll get a response. Thank you for the call.
So, Raphael, you're absolutely right. Presidents do get the right to name Supreme Court justices when there are vacancies. I'm just wondering why Republicans didn't allow President Obama to name and have confirmed his Merrick Garland to the Supreme Court seat. And secondly, yes, presidents get to carry out that very awesome task, but they get to name a justice, but they don't get to have that justice confirmed if that nominee is someone whose views are antithetical to core constitutional values, if their views show us, as they do with Neil Gorsuch, that he would side with the wealthy and powerful at the expense of all the rest of us. They don't get the right to have that happen.
Let me conclude with a question about the chamber behind us, the U.S. Senate, because last week the Senate Republican leader told Chris Wallace that Neil Gorsuch will be confirmed one way or the other, a veiled reference to potentially incorporating the nuclear option for Supreme Court justices. If that were to happen, from your standpoint, what impact would that have on the Senate as an institution?
Well, first I would say, Steve, not so fast. When Robert Bork was nominated 30 years ago, overwhelming idea in this country was, of course Robert Bork will get confirmed. I know, I was part of that effort. So one, I'm not into the predicting game, and it's not at all clear he'll get confirmed.
I'm just telling you what he said.
But two, so I think he's wrong. But number two, I would say, I think you're referring to if the Democrats filibuster and Republicans have to employ what's known as the nuclear option to do away with the filibuster for Supreme Court justices. We'll see if that happens. There are a number of Republicans who are very opposed to that idea at the moment. But if it happens, I'm sure that Republicans will have to bear the brunt of criticism for going nuclear. I mean, it's called the nuclear option because it's a rather explosive device to open up the whole Senate process. And if they do that, they will have to defend having gone nuclear for Supreme Court nominations. And it will mean that if they lose control of that Senate in 2018, 2020, they lose the opportunity to filibuster a Democratic president's possible nominations.
Nan Aron of Alliance for Justice. I'm sure we'll have you on often over the coming months. Thank you very much for being with us. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
Zalmay Khalilzad is going to be joining us, the former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, as we talk about some of the challenges and